webinars organized by Project Race and Prajna on transforming gender norms. For 3 weeks now, every Friday, we've been talking about the importance of working with men and boys, and also how people have started doing this work, the things that have worked for them, the things that have been surprising, unintended, intended consequences. And today we bring this series to a close with with a conversation among people who work in funding organizations, donor organizations, organizations that partner with others that do work in the area of drawing men and boys into gender equality work. And we are really interested in hearing from them about the way they think about these issues and what matters to them. You know, there's what we see as a need, there's what we are able to do, and then there are, for some of us who work in very small organizations, a little bit off the funding track, so to speak. It's always hard to gauge what one is supposed to be doing. Where is the bar? What are the measurements that other people are thinking about? So a conversation that covers all of these, and like the others, we're looking for a very free-flowing discussion in which I hope you will join later on. I am delighted to introduce the facilitator for today, who we worked with at Prajna for so long that sometimes I forget she's not part of our team and she actually works somewhere else. So my friend, Damayanti Sridharan, is Senior Advisor in the Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality Project at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung India office. She has been working in different capacities in the development and finance sectors for more than 20 years. The positions involved advisory and hands-on experience in dealing with development projects, finance, and banking-related tasks, and research in the same areas. Damayanti's areas of interest include gender, capacity building, women in work, and women in politics. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung is the oldest of German political foundations dating back to 1925. The foundation owes its formation and mission to the political legacy of Friedrich Ebert, the first democratically elected president of Germany. FES is an independent nonprofit organization. They promote the core values of social democracy, freedom, justice, and solidarity in Germany, and with country offices in more than 100 countries worldwide. They share these values with social democracy and the international labor movement. And much of our work uh, with Damayanti and the FES India team has actually been around women in work. So over to you, Damayanti, your show now.
Thank you, Swarna, and good evening to everyone. Thank you, Swarna, for a very, how should I put it, a very warm introduction. And you know that we feel the same about Prajna and always have enjoyed working with you and with the team over there. Today, for this panel discussion on investing in inclusive social change, we have a very illustrious panel, and it's my absolute delight to introduce the three panelists. We have with us Alifia Locherwala from the Empower Foundation. Alifia is the Senior Program Officer of India at Empower, the Emerging Markets Foundation, and she's responsible for developing and managing grantee partnerships and other program initiatives in India. Alifia embarked on her journey as a development sector professional over 12 years ago, though her experimentation with education as a tool for building adolescent girls' agency. She brings her passion and expertise in the area of gender, inclusion, and intersectionality in her work. Alifia is a massive believer in the colossal power of coalitions, as I guess as most of the people who are here today, and its potential to lead to systematic changes. Thank you, Alifia, for being part of this panel, and we look forward to your inputs. We also have with us Sonia Fernandez, who is the Senior Manager Programs at the Philanthropy, that is the Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiatives. where she leads the gender-based violence theme. She has more than 15 years experience in clean energy projects, monitoring and evaluations, and fund management, and a lot more like impact assessment, social development, research and policy analysis. Sonia has worked with multilateral, bilateral, international organizations, research institutes, think tanks in the areas of climate change, livelihood, gender and health, and also on energy nexus, environment, and sustainability. We're very glad to have you with us, Sonia, and look forward to your inputs. And the last person whom I'm introducing, but of course not the least, Nandita Barua from the Asia Foundation. Nandita is presently the Asia Foundation's country representative in India. She has over 25 years of experience working on gender, human rights, labor migration, and human trafficking issues in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. Among her many honors, in 2010, Nandita was awarded the Prime Minister's Gold Medal by the Royal Government of Cambodia for her technical support to the Cambodian government for creation of victim protection policies and practices. Thank you, Nandita, for being part of this panel. And I think I'll start with you and for this discussion and ask you first that what in your mind is the rationale for supporting gender equality work, which that engages men and boys, and how did it come about within your organization, that is Asia Foundation?
Thanks, Damayanti, and really honored to be a part of such a illustrious panel and an equally illustrious audience. I can recognize many names, people I've known for years and people who have known more recently. So I'm giving a shout out to Geeta, whose name I'm seeing after a long time, Geeta Mishra there. Nice to see you, Suhasini, Nandini. So yeah, let me begin by saying that, you know, as an Asia Foundation, I think given the fact that we have country offices in 18 countries, we've had to really contextualize our work on gender depending on the countries where we are working in within Asia. And it came about as our work started looking at more traditional work of women's empowerment, trying to look at economic empowerment of women's issues, gender-based violence. And I think somewhere about, I would probably say 10 years, maybe, or a little later, couple of country offices actually felt that whatever we were doing towards looking at women's empowerment, I think the story remained incomplete if we didn't look at the other critical half, who was greatly also responsible for the disempowerment issues we were talking about. So if we didn't look at the men and the boys and didn't see how they completed the process of empowerment, things would not work out. So it started with that. It started with that thinking, saying we need to engage with men and boys. And unlike, I think it started for the women's movement globally as well, where we started looking at, men against violence against women, trying to look at men to be voices on behalf of issues of women's rights. But I think it went a little beyond that for us over the years. And we realized while that is also important, I think critically in the last 3 to 4 years of the foundation's work, at least, and I know it's happening for much longer in other institutions, we've also started focusing on really looking at the construct of masculinities itself. Because while we worked with men and boys, we also realized that unless we also address the masculinities within which male behavior, male perspective, male opinions, male rights existed, it would be very difficult to, in a true way, change the perspectives and behavior of society at large to look at equity. So that's what also then moved us to different trajectories. It does not mean that all the foundation's offices or countries are looking at it at the same lens. I think it's also very contextual to the realities of the countries in which we operate. But in India, definitely, I think currently our focus is not just to engage men to be the voice for women empowerment, but also to look at men as a group and within that, look at the intersectionality of masculinity and femininity and how that probably needs to be unpacked, understood, and maybe, for a lack of better word, reconstructed, though I don't think that's the right word to use, but somewhere we can revisit that construct to make it such that the power dynamics within patriarchy can be addressed better. So that's where we are coming for. We work with various organizations. We're also doing our own research on understanding masculinity right now within ESCO. So yeah, that's where we are looking at it.
Wow. Well, if I could come to you, Alifia, I think for you, maybe the journey was a little different and not really the classical way where the focus was initially on women and then on um, the way most organizations which have been working for a long period on women's empowerment or gender issues. So, could you share your experiences on how you started in Empower and what has been your experience?
Sure. A large part of what Nandita said is similar. So we started investments in India, grant making in India in the year 2000, and in the areas of health and well-being, economic well-being, and inclusive education. And our focus has always been youth. So 10 to 24 is the age group that Empower has been focusing on across all regions that we work in. But as we started increasing our work in India, we recognized that gender needs to be a cross-cutting theme. So that recognition was a part of the organizational theory of change early on. What started emerging is as we started hearing stories from the ground and talking to partner organizations, the need for community engagement also became more and more evident, and that has been recognized again since early years of our work in India. What did happen is. After the Delhi gang rape case, there was more and more recognition of the need to address toxic masculinity and gender based violence with groups of men and boys and intentionally talk to them. So that recognition grew in the sector, and I think that's true across the country. There was a growing concern and recognition that there has to be intentional work around that. Um, but what we also started hearing from our partner organization is even though you have an intentional focus on adolescent girls and young women, the work will never reach its optimal potential unless we talk to other stakeholders and, most importantly, the decision makers, who unfortunately end up being the fathers and the brothers and male community members who are the gatekeepers. So even when we were conscious of community engagement, partner organizations started saying that it's mainly the mothers who come for these meetings, and unless we build in an intentional focus of talking to fathers and brothers, we will really start hitting a roadblock. And one of the partners that did start having these conversations with Empower early on, this is even before I had joined Empower, was Angan. And Angan did come back to Empower and say that we will have to have a component of engaging men and boys as a part of everything that we do. So that was the beginning of the journey. And then over the years, we have organizations like Azad, ECF, Koro, Akshara, all of our partner organizations have been echoing these voices that we have to. Research shows, evidence shows that we have to intentionally engage with across stakeholders, but also intentionally engage with men and boys. And because Empower's grant making is a 10-year, goes up to a period of 10 years, we have been started seeing success stories of and understanding how important that component is. And as a part of the Girls Advisory Council that advises Empower's strategy for the country, the girls themselves came and said that it's great that we have girl-only spaces, and it really is helpful to talk about sensitive issues, but we need to engage with men and boys. So it was cross-cutting theme that was emerging from the field, from partner organizations, and from girl leaders from the Girls Advisory Council. And of course, I mean, we just could not focus on adolescent girls and young women unless we intentionally addressed it. So that's what our journey has been. Even for us, we are learning on the go, and our ears are constantly on the ground to see what partner organizations are saying. Um, so that's where we are, and then I can delve deeper into some of the learnings as we move along.
Yeah. But Alifia, you mentioned that your engagement was more with the communities to begin with the girls and adolescents and all. So was it within those communities that you are working with the men and boys, or is it a separate group? How, I mean, could you just
So
add a bit on that?
sure. So it's a mix of everything. It's so Empowered also holds learning communities in Bombay and Delhi for now, and within those spaces as well, girls have started saying that all in the campaigns that we run, in the engagements that we do with various stakeholders, we want to engage with men and boys. So that's one component of it. Besides that, we also support organizations like ECF and Azad and Koro, and many others who have a separate program on addressing gender based violence issues and gender equity issues with men and boys. Besides that, we also now over the last few months have started looking as talking to men and boys as a cross cutting theme. So irrespective of what the program is, be it employability, be it education, be it health and well being, we are encouraging more and more partners to look at embedding modules of talking to boys, and we are asking support from organizations like ECF and Azad to share their resources with partners who want to start this work. So it's across, it's a mix, a combination of all these three areas.
And Sonia, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understood for your foundation, it is more the theme which is important, that is education. And how did you then come to work with men and boys?
Okay, so I'll just dwell a little on the evolution and the rationale through which philanthropy worked in the past. And I think we're pretty much a new kid in the block, right? So we've been, there only for around 6 years, and I can proudly say in the last 6 years, I think programs around gender-based violence, what we initially called domestic violence, are the longest of programs that we've had, right? So but we perhaps got a learning of about 6 years, but philanthropy didn't start as an organization that only supported gender issues. Right? We worked on a battery of several things.
Sonia, if I can just stop you here. There's some problem with your voice. If you can use the mic or
Okay.
come closer.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, as I was saying, that philanthropy didn't start as an organization. Okay, is this better?
As of now.
All right, stop me whenever it's not. I'll repeat it. Repeat what I'm saying. I'm sorry about the connection. We're sitting in the back of Beyond, and I've tried different connections, but this seems to be working well. The philanthropy didn't start as an organization that supported only gender issues. We worked with domestic violence. We worked with small and marginal farmers. We worked in health. We worked on nutrition. We worked on livelihood. We worked on governance, and the list is endless because at that point of time we were also learning about issues, and I think a lot of colleagues that came before me in this organization were practitioners, but our inherent value of the organization is the humility to have a learner's perspective. So we said that whatever we have done in our professional life, we keep that aside, and we look at programs in a view wherein we learn why organizations do what they do the way they do it. That helped us a lot in the long run, primarily because I can't think of another way of why we wouldn't have arrived at a place where we would not support men and boys. It was inevitable. We would land up here sooner or later. Luckily for us, we landed up sooner here. Right? And I think our partners had a huge role to play with us, saying that right now we want to work with supporting men and boys, especially looking at them as allies in the fight against gender-based violence, right? And picking and getting them to work on par with the women that we work in the communities that we work in. So we then in the process to start with had several good organizations, ones that were extremely seasoned like Sneha, Koro, Majlis, Vimochana, and it was diverse. It was beautiful because we had Majlis and Majlis doing legal work, Vimochana working with survivors, of burn survivors and acid attack victims. Sneha saying that we want to stay in a community and stick around there until we can see the change and we can hand over the entire baton to the community, right? And we want to then invest in certain things, but we want the community to own this entire battle against gender-based violence. Coro, of course, you know about them. We had organizations. Fortunately, we've had organizations not only in cities, which we are now, trying to ensure that we have organizations from Rajasthan, from UP, from Haryana to teach us different things. We also, luckily, I think we've tried our best as a donor to engage with the partners, and we believe in engage, right? No matter what little time we have, and we're all running a marathon, but we ensure that we try to be with them on the ground. And as and when we were engaging, at least I was engaging on the ground with women leaders and girl leaders, and they sound fantastic, having women leaders and girl leaders. It was we realized that empowerment shifts for them, so it's easier when it's early for them, when they're 12 years old and 14 years old. Empowerment is almost within their grasp, right? But as and when they start getting older, it starts getting further and further more challenging, tougher battles to fight, uglier wars, and you're fighting battles against your own, which is their brothers, their husbands, their sons, and they didn't want to really continue fighting these battles. It was exhausting them. So sometimes they would just cave in. From this, we realized that there is no other way. It's as clear as day that we have to start working with men. We have to bring them on board and continue working with it. So that's how we arrived in it. I can get on, I can go on with the learnings that we had with the program, the conversations we had with girls there. But I'll stop here and take off.
I think it's the rationale comes out very clearly when one is talking about working with gender-based violence and things, and extension to that work. But what about when within your organizations you're working on different verticals and not just on issues of gender, some other issues of, say, industrial relations or security or something? How is the work with men and boys seen within the organization, and how do the colleagues react to this kind of work which is being done in the different verticals, like in the gender-based violence against women work and other verticals?
So you've touched on a kind of an internal battle that we continue to face, right? It is, especially when you're an organization that works in different verticals and in silos. Creating porosity between those verticals is the most challenging task, in sense. It's of course great to speak about trying to see that gender equity is a lens that is used in every program. But when you actually try to operationalize it, there are so many barriers. You basically are then asking question: why is caste not used as a lens? Why is class not used as a lens? Right? So you continue to try and defend why gender needs to be used as a lens. We're trying that. So we started with having a homogeneous set of programs where everything was in one basket. We then learn from these programs, and it's a process. It's an organic evolution process. We've learned from those programs, we've structured, and I think it's just been a year since we've restructured ourselves internally to try and see how we can do more within the team and how can we do more between teams. Yeah? So even if we look at a program that we have on tribal rights, we try to ensure that the program includes women, tribal populations in that entire domain. If we have a program on disability, we've seen inherently of the several partners have working in the area of disability, girls are automatically not included in it. Most of the centers are for boys or men who are disabled. Girls basically do not access these centers. So we're trying to do that. In nutrition, a huge program in nutrition in Orissa, the symptom is malnutrition, but the cause is women health, right? And the ownership that men and boys have to ensure that nutrition is provided to them. The entire concept of prenatal health and also adolescent health, all of these are something that we are interlinking. It's mammoth. It's very difficult to right now think about how to structure it, but it's growing organically, and we continue to want to do that in the future. In fact, we're looking at a gender lens at the organization levels also, right? So it's program and organization.
Nandita, you have worked in so many organizations and in so many countries. So, what has been your experience, and especially on how to get more colleagues on board, and what are the things or what are the strategies which have helped in doing that?
To me, the first question that we have been asking, and both personally and collectively, at least within the foundation, some of the other organizations, is, I mean, one of the biggest disservice that happened to gender issues was when we invented the term gender mainstreamed. That really jeopardized gender like nobody's business. So most programs then started saying we have mainstream gender without really even defining what it is. It just meant ticking the box. So pulling back people who were already thinking that they had gender mainstreamed in an econ program or a conflict and peace program requires a lot more. First thing, Damayanti, I think it also requires for the institution you are in, to unpack its own understanding of what DEI is. Is the institution itself looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion at an institutional organic level? Does the institution look at its own HR policies with the lens where you are consciously ensuring that you are an institution which is diversely represented, equitably represented, gender inclusive? That's a big battle, because once that happens and that questioning happens in an organization, then getting the people who are manning that organization, the human resource that's manning organizations and running programs, becomes a step easier. But if the institution is gender blind, then talking about mainstreaming or including gender or equity or inclusion within any program is at best is a ticking the box. At worst, it's just not heard, right? So I think for me, that's probably the first benchmark of saying, let's just also question ourselves institutionally in whichever institutions we are. How are we looking at equity? I can say that in the foundation, that's something we are looking very closely at now. And of course, it's the reasons for that happened less because of what happened in the global south and more because of what happened in the global north in the last 5 to 7 years, I think. But it's a questioning. The second thing then, of course, is getting people to recognize that whether you're working in peace and conflict, if you don't have a gender lens, you are going to have a half-baked program. It's only going to address the needs of a particular section of the population and leave out the other completely out of reckoning. For example, in Nepal, the post-conflict work that the foundation did, a lot of the focus was on looking at the female combatants who were a part of the People's Revolution there, who were fighting equally, doing the same things that all their male comrades were doing. But when the peace accord happened, the numbers were right, but the voices were not. So you had the right number of women, and you said 50%, and you all of that, but getting their voices on the table to say, wait a minute, the post-peace accord packages needs to provide for women differently, because you are then going to push her back into the same society from where she came, fighting equitably, to then having to, redefine her own identity in a society which is not moved out of patriarchy. So unless you provide more affirmative actions, so those things become a long-term debate. It is not something that happens automatically, but it has to be absolutely brought to the forefront. We do that a lot, and currently we are also doing looking at the whole area of international foreign policy work or development work, and thinking about how gendered is that. Whether your foreign policy is driven by the pandemic and the COVID, or it's driven by border skimmerish, water resource management, cross-boundary movement of people, human trafficking. I think that we have to constantly ask our colleagues and ourselves these questions. just because I am doing gender work and some of us are doing gender work, it doesn't mean that we automatically also have answers or solutions to this, but it's a collective. Our focus has been, and I feel that organizations which have succeeded are the ones who have asked themselves the toughest questions first before going and talking about it programmatically. And I think if you ask yourself the tough question and find some answers, you probably are in a better place to move programmatically on.
I think most of us who's been in this sector for a long time have experienced the same thing. And probably what has really helped is having these conversations with others in different organizations, because then you realize that it's not something unique to your organization and it's not something which only you feel that you're fighting against, but it's actually, unfortunately, quite the norm. So, Alifia, what has it been like in Empower? And if to put you a bit more in the corner, well, you're young and maybe nowadays there's more this issue of looking at things from the feminist perspective. And that kind of, like Nandita said, gender mainstreaming is something which could, the worst thing which could have happened. How do you feel about the feminist lens and talking about it within the organization with colleagues and things also?
I think in that sense, I have been very lucky because one is that even before I joined, right from the moment Empower started its investments and grant making, there was a very clear gender focus and youth focus. So in that sense, either myself as a senior program officer or my other colleagues did not really have to, it was not an either or, it was not a zero sum problem for us. What we have been consciously, intentionally looking at is refining, learning, relearning our own understanding, and hence going back to the partners time and again to seek understand their understanding. I'm consciously not using the word solutions because there's no one solution. I'm very, very aware, and we all at the organization are very, very aware of the complexity of the problem, the intersectionality, and all other issues that otherwise can be pushed under the carpet. So it's not like we are working with a homogeneous group of women and girls or a homogeneous group of men and boys. We are very conscious of the fact that there is a lot of local context that plays a huge role in the dynamics, in patriarchy, in the power issues that unfolds itself. And I think what has worked most of the time, what has worked very well is going back to the organization and understanding what's working and what's not working. And also, because this model is a partnership that can go up to a period of 10 years, it's not like none of us are looking for immediate results, immediate goals. It's not a number game for us. We are very, very conscious of the fact that our vision is to build is to support youth reach their full potential and have an affirmative lens on supporting young women and girls intentionally. But having said that, I think the complexity is how do we, and I've heard this debate even in your previous panels, is how much do we invest in adolescent girl programming and how much do we invest in men and boys. And for none of us, we are very clear that it's not either or. It all fits in. These are all different pieces of the puzzle that fit into the larger scheme of things, because now there's more and more evidence coming from our partner organizations and even from international organizations that so many programs on women's economic well-being or education or even sexual and reproductive health cannot and have not been reaching their full potential, or there is a lot of two steps forward, one step forward, two step backward kind of a problem, because there's so much externalities that need to be addressed. The inherent patriarchy, toxic masculinities, also the unknown invisible privileges that the society provides to certain classes and genders. And unless we really look at this whole issue holistically, unless we address the issue of safety and mobility and agency using the lens of there is one training program, one skilling program is not going to increase women's workforce participation in the country. We will never be able to really, and now we have evidence to show that the participation has been reducing more than ever before. So these are very many questions that all of us internally and externally have been really intrigued by and trying to look at what are the possible um ways of addressing these issues. Um, what has also worked very well for us is intentionally creating spaces for coalitions. So we've launched this program called Building Bridges at Empower, where we fund the process of collaboration between partners. Because over the last decade or maybe more, so many dialogues of collaborate, partner, etc., have been happening. But what does that mean in terms of action? And to address that, we thought that maybe let's intentionally say that we'll support this process of collaboration. We understand that you've spent a lot of time and resources in building in building your curriculum or in building your own program. We want to share it with others, but we will financially and non-financially support all the investments that you've made. And on the other hand, bring on board partners that are open to embedding these programs. So that whole process of give and take and facilitating that process is something that's unfolding really beautifully, because so many organizations want to make that change but don't want to embed different kinds of programming but don't have the resources to internally develop it themselves. So those are the different kinds of dialogues that we've been having internally and externally with our program partners.
Taking from what you mentioned about your programming being more long term, so in that sense, I guess it is easier to develop indicators for how one measures the work and all. But one of the refrain which comes to quite often in the development sector is how does one actually measure social change? And what has, Sonia, if you would like to start this time, what are the kind of outputs which you look for or impacts which you look for uh, organizationally? Sonia?
Yeah, I'm hoping that I'm better. You can hear me better right now. Okay, so like I said, when we started with supporting programs on gender-based violence, it was primarily community-based initiatives, right? And here the indicators are quite intangible. I think we have been pushing our partners to put aspirational indicators, such as figuring out how could they uh, how could they basically help women reclaim spaces. Simple programs like reclaim spaces. So simple programs like if an organization is working on creating a career of sports women, right, within a minority community, wherein the playgrounds are basically accessed mostly by boys and men and not accessible to girls. How do you do that as an indicator? How do you ensure that the space can be accessible to girls? Also, bystander engagement. When it comes to not just community leaders, every time there's a case of violence, not just community leaders turning up at the doorstep of the woman, or the woman coming to a center, but how does that entire issue get sorted out at the community? Bystander engagement. How many men access centers, not just women and survivors, but the boys and the men who come maybe out of curiosity or maybe because they just want to know about what's happening, or if they believe that there is something that is not happening that's in their household that is not right, can they come and access the center? Are the centers conducive to men and boys accessing them to a certain extent? And also, how are the programs designed? So another important indicator for us is that and I'm still sticking to the aspect of men and boys because we have several things that we do under gender, including restorative justice practices, livelihood to gender linkages, unconventional employment. But I'm just speaking about men and boys right now. How do organizations create structures within them on and capacitate their staff to engage with men and boys? What is the capacity of a staff to do that? Are they separating the women program and the men program, right? That also has got its pros and cons to it. I think more cons because when you separate the two programs and you're working in silos, it becomes the indicators and the impact are more diluted compared to working in tandem. So these are a few indicators, and we are building it as we go. Of course, there are many indicators that come from the partners, but a lot of our indicators are a learning process on whether it works or not. Primarily because our programs are also short term. We cannot attribute these indicators and this change to philanthropy alone, because philanthropy has just come very recently into this program. A lot of change has happened on ground, right? And we need to then figure out what has a change happened so far. Where does philanthropy come in to catalyze these change to an area wherein organizations feel that there is a lot more that can be done with funding. I'd say that more than the number of years that we fund organizations, we give them a lot of flexibility with the funding. We say that you don't have to focus more on creating more centers and infrastructure, focus on salaries, on building capacity, on creating a cadre of good community-based workers who can engage with men and boys, who know how to do it. If they don't know how to do it, let's train them and build their capacity to do that. Create organization structures that go beyond philanthropy on the long run. Okay, I've got a lot of messages saying that my voice is not clear. I am so sorry about it. It's just a network issue. So,
Yeah,
so
Sonia, we do have a bit of a problem with your voice, but one tries to strain and hear, and I think we are managing.
okay.
Maybe if you could
But like
stop the
Sonia
video
spoke
or mute
about
the
more
video,
in terms of
probably this would be clearer.
the partner organizations. Nandita, can you chip in with what it is within your organization? How do you embed the outputs or the indicators? What is the process for Asia Foundation, and not with the program partners, but within the foundation?
I think within the foundation, like I said, for us, it's very important that whenever we pick up an issue, there has to be an internal learning curve for ourselves. And we actually start off with doing a fair amount of intensive research and analysis of the issue in the context of the country we are operating in, and then try to define the entry points, either through exclusive programs that address, whether it's mobility for women or whether it's working with young boys in school, or it is just working in conflict affected areas like Mindanao. We try to then identify the entry points, which we feel we will be able to sustain, not just with our women's empowerment related sources of funding, but with funding that is specific to a larger or broader pool of activities within, say, the governance framework or the econ framework. So for us, therefore, the indicators also are things that are that we try to see that they are embedded in the bigger pillars of work that we are engaged in, or pillars or objectives that we are engaged in. And in order to do that, it just becomes essential for us to do the research to say, if you are really working in conflict, which would be the countries, what it is that you are trying to change. And every conflict is different, right? So within that area of conflict, really doing the political economy analysis and finding the indicators. There really is no one shoe fits all kind of an indicators or results framework that we apply. It's very, very specific to the context and the issue that we are working in. Also, I think for us, the results are something that we also like to look at. How can they be amplified with the partnerships we built? So even when we are supporting other organizations, it's not an idea that we like to embed or implement. We like to find partners who may be thinking along the same curve that we are, maybe ahead of us in the curve, can inform our thinking. And so the issue that we are working with, whether it's engaging with men and boys or looking at masculinities, has to be organic to that organization. So it's not dependent on just us being a funder and therefore bringing in the resources, but something that they have grown and developed themselves and have certain results to speak of, which we could then either amplify or also use to inform our own thinking and take it to the next level of programming. So that's how we operate. So it's pretty much, I would say, iterative organic learning that we go by.
Alifia, how do you do it at Empower? And would you also talk about how you make it a kind of a participatory process, or how do you involve the partners in this process of seeing the outcomes or coming to the outcomes?
Sure. So it's contextualized based on the work the programmatic focus that the partners have. And a lot of the objectives are set in partnership with the program leaders themselves. Couple of things that we look at in terms of such programs that can be a bit intangible and more long term is to simplify things and also be able to communicate to our grants committee and our own investors, is to look at increase in knowledge, change in attitudes and behaviors. Those are two simple, even in terms of measurement and reporting, it's we think that that's a good starting point. So the fact that there will be an increased understanding and increase in knowledge of patriarchy, privileges, gender-based violence, and how it impacts the society as a whole. It's and of course impacts girls and women more so than others. So that's the simple answer to that question. But more than that, I think we also recognize that this is a whole continuum, and each partner is at a different stage in the continuum. So though we have organizations who have been doing this for a long time and have the expertise, have undertaken on ground researches to see what works, what doesn't work, we are also very open to encouraging partners to start this somewhere. I mean, we all have to start somewhere, and because this is nascent comparatively, it's nascent. We are very flexible with defining what the objectives is, completely recognizing that एक साल में आप जो generations and generations से patriarchy चलते आ रहा है, आप उसको change नहीं कर पाओगे. But what is it that we can look at achieving? So in that framework, then increase in knowledge, a little bit of change in attitude and behavior does help. The other piece that I do want to highlight is also bringing on board organizations that have been working on these issues like ECF, Azad, Koro as our knowledge partners, so that then they can support other organizations who are interested in looking at this and embedding it in their program, and support them throughout. So not only support them in training, but also support them in helping at looking at M&E and that process. Because no one person or one organization will have the expertise. This is very contextualized. So those are the 2-3 things that we have been looking at in terms of defining the framework. And the other piece is we are very conscious that the larger goal is building agency, and that can only happen if this is intentionally addressed. Youth reaching their full potential will only happen if we start addressing, looking at the whole Raja Beta syndrome, as Srinivas from Azad mentioned to me, that we are so, as a society, so embedded in this Raja Beta syndrome कि उसको recognize और नहीं करेंगे जब तक, और उसको address नहीं करेंगे, we will keep dealing with the same issues again and again.
Before we move on, I'd just like to say that anyone who has any questions and all, just feel free to put it up in the chat, or even any comments on the discussions going on. So taking this forward, one thing, though all of you have talked about having a collaborative approach, trying to work together, learning from each other, there's always one thing which comes up when there's talk of partner organizations, resource providers, and that is that I'll just quote something which someone once told me, a very leading activist, and that is that this relation is always very, very unequal, because one is a resource provider and one is a receiver. So how do you react to that? And at the same time, there's also the fact that all organizations come with their own mandate, and it's also important for the partner organizations to understand the mandate with which the resource providers come from. So what has been your experience, and do you think this is justified, or how do you deal with it? Any of you can go.
Okay, I'm going to go
Sorry,
very
you
quick.
go ahead, because we find it.
So I'm going to just test my network through this answer. And I've very quickly moved to another place, and I'm hoping I'm more audible. So on a very light note, we've done a lot of grants with organizations, and there's always a power dynamic there. To start with, we have, as an organization, practiced respectfulness, and we basically abide by it and imbibe it within our principles and values, and constructive hearing through a partner. So we uh, first set of grants that we made, we used a frame called the Value in Itself grant, wherein we told organizations that we would want to come and learn from you. We would want to support the programs like the way you do it, and since you've been doing it for 10 years, we would like to continue to support it without any changes. Of course, as we evolved as an organization, that frame started shifting. I'm hoping I'm audible and clear. I'm clear, right? Is my voice clear?
A little bit.
Okay. So the frames. So coming back to the question, with the experience with partners that we've had, I've realized that, and we have realized that partners working in gender-based violence are relatively quite, I'd say, strong partners, right? So they wouldn't be influenced by the power dynamic too much. They know what they have and they know what to deliver, and they are very strong-headed about things that they want to deliver on. We like that, and we enjoyed having these partners on our board. For example, Goro, Sneha, Majlis. This power dynamics didn't affect them and us at all. And we continue to support them for 3 years, and then 6 years, and now 9 years. The only ask they had was that you support us for a longer time and not just years. They really wanted a long-term engagement with philanthropy to stabilize some of their programs. We continue to have a debate with them on how long can long-term be, which is an ongoing dialogue that we have with the partners. Programmatically, we also have certain pull and pushes with respect to how much can you do in a program, right? And how much are you willing to push the boundaries of what your normal program is and what you want to do more, especially with respect to incubating and piloting new programs to bring in smaller organizations on board. So this is something that we are speaking with them, but I think we have managed to figure out a balanced relationship with many of our partners, which is, I think we've done well with it.
Nandita, would you like to come in?
Sure. I think to be fair and pragmatic, I think it's not always wrong to say that the relationship between the grantee and the one who's receiving the grant can be unequal. That there is probably some truth in that. It also varies from organization to organization, right? As Sonia just said, some navigate it better. It also depends on the source of funding. So, for example, the Asia Foundation, we are not an endowed foundation. So it's not like we have an endowed philanthropy, we raise funds. Now, the sources from which we raise funds would have their own desire to see how they would like to report back on that fund to the audience back home, wherever that is, or whatever that is, or to their key stakeholders. It's your ability then to negotiate with the source of your funding to say that how much of a liberty they would have to get what they want, to get the results. I think everybody is looking for results, but without that being dictated in a way that it undermines the thinking of the recipient organization, whether it is us directly or it is downstream to us and other partners. It's not always easy. Some sources of fundings are more difficult to handle than other sources of funding, without naming who those are or that are. But within the foundation, I think for us, when it is our core fund, and we do have core fund, we are not an endowed foundation, but we do have core fund, that gives us a much more liberty in really seeding and planting programs that are organic to the organizations we are working with. So like I said, we would prefer that the ideas are not something we have an idea, therefore we want you to work in that. It's just that we have an idea, is there an organization which is also thinking similarly, or would the organization be willing to get onto a journey with us? So that's more equitable, and that's just also means that it's not just a funding relationship for us, it's a relationship of joint journey, learning, knowledge sharing, and maybe even based on what the organization is achieving, tweaking our own program. We may not have been in the right track when we started off, so being open to that, but that flexibility happens when the funding is totally your own and it's your core. Sometimes it doesn't happen when it is not your core. And that's where I think it's the ability of each office to be able to push back and negotiate.
And how flexible would various organizations be in, like, say, at the time of the pandemic, something happens or there is unforeseen circumstance, and one has to react immediately, like with the migrant crisis or something. Do you have that flexibility to react immediately?
When it is our core funding, absolutely. When it is not, we have used our own relationship and the space and the table with the funders to rejig resources and make it responsive to the need that our partners have come back to us and say the funding may have been for water governance, but at this point it's just the need for simple drinking water, not water governance. So I think moving that fund there and making a case on behalf of the program to the source of the funding, say that this is where it needs to be done. It's not 100% win all the time, but I would say it's close to an 80 to 90% win if you're able to convince whoever is on the other table. I mean, again, at the end of the day, Damayanti, it's also the person who is sitting on that side on the table, right? It's also very individual about the ability of who you are talking to, whether their own understanding is willing to be and open to research. 89-90% of the time, yes, but there are 10% of the time when you're like, maybe I shouldn't have embarked on this journey.
Alifia, would you like to respond also?
Yeah, I'll respond to both your questions actually. To be honest and pragmatic, there is an inherent power dynamic in the whole relationship of grant making, funding, and we can't ignore it. But what we can do is recognize it and be sensitive to then what processes we follow as an organization. So we consciously are always reminded that we do want to stick to trust-based philanthropy, and we walk the talk by simplifying our M&E processes, reporting processes. It's one simple report in maybe 9 months or 1 year, and also the grants renewal may not. It's not like the grant would stop if the objectives haven't been met. So I think those kind of processes does convey the message that yes, inherently there is, in the space of grant making, there is an inherent power, but can we look at power with and work towards shared goals? I think the other aspect is also to have joint agency to negotiate. So I've also been hearing conversations around, a lot of organizations end up being driven by donors, and donors drive the agenda, so on and so forth. My counter argument to that is that also the agency to not take that funding that does not align with your organization's goal is completely yours. So to really to really put the ball in one person's court is sometimes not fair, because each one has to exercise their own leadership and agency in the space they're in. It's also important to recognize that these are shared goals. It can't be one organization's mandate, and hence the receiving organization changes their goals to get funding. So recognizing the fact that these are shared goals, objectives need to be set jointly, so on and so forth, will probably make the process easier, um, and would help us look at the whole power with aspect more closely. To your question of flexible funding, absolutely. So even we are also not an endowment, so there's only that much of flexibility that we inherently have in terms of what we can dedicate money towards. but even within whatever resources we have, our immediate response to the organization's program partners was do what you need to do at this point in time. We recognize this is a global pandemic. You have to meet your local community's needs. Feel free to repurpose, repivot the objectives that you had set and do what you need to do. That's the best that we could do. And we continue to have those dialogues on really, shall we reset objectives, shall we relook at program, how do we adapt it, and so on and so forth. So those are the principles that inherently we have in-house taken a stand on, and we are constantly internally also relooking at what else can we do. We are also constantly relooking at our own grant making processes and our own reporting formats. Like I said, I don't think there's one absolute correct way of doing it. But having said that, what we can do to the best right now is just keep re-looking at what works, and keep asking for feedback from partner organizations, because that's the most important piece. Unless they dedicate time to really give us critical inputs, we would not understand what needs to change. So it's a two-way process, I would say.
Yeah, I think I totally agree that it's a matter of having joint goals and the two-way process. And one does try, but at times it's just not feasible because of the mandate of a particular organization, which is responsible for the resources from somewhere else. And but yes, as long as the process is transparent and one is able to talk about it, I think that's what's most important. I think I could go on, and it's just so interesting talking to you, all of you. But I think I'll open the floor for questions. And there, I saw one or two questions in the chat. It's gone up. It'll take me. Can someone help me? There was one question which I can't find now.
Yes, I
From
did I read it?
yeah, Antika, continue.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so the question was that when the leaders when the leaders have such type of patriarchal ideology, how can we think about bringing in the bigger change in the policy when leaders are patriarchal themselves?
Any of you can go.
I could take that. I mean, my response is yes, absolutely agree, and a lot of really change is driven by the leadership. Um, that's the way it is. So what we do is at the time of making that, and our grant making is mostly by invite. We are very conscious of assessing whether this is an organization that will really be able to have will be able to address patriarchy, because a lot of times in some forms of dialogues we can recognize that their understanding of gender is also very not very deep, let me put it that way. And yes, that is a challenge, and hence the need to really look at representation and diversity at the leadership level, at the board level, a request for gender as a cross-cutting theme, irrespective of whether it's education, health, or economic well-being, is a request that I mean, we are very transparent that this is the mandate of the organization, and only if they're interested in and can show that this is an area of interest do we proceed with the relationship. But I absolutely agree that the leadership does play a significant role.
I think if one takes it not only from within the organizational point of view, but from the larger societal point of view also, it's all about, and one does see that this is a issue, but until and unless one does not engage, and if only looks at things from a perspective that the other person is a withholder, we not really be able to move ahead. And one has to kind of, the same like when one needs to engage with men and boys, one has to engage and move forward. Otherwise, there's no way ahead. Um, Actually, I'm having a bit of a problem to look at the chats. It's not moving up and down my screen. So if there's anything else,
There's just now a question from Vinayak Pawar. How do you look at building, promoting the second line leadership, especially women's leadership within the organization, within an organization that you have been supporting for a long time?
Um, I'll take that to start off with. Is that okay, Damayanti? Swarna?
yeah, sure.
Yeah. I think very pertinent because I feel that, women, if especially as somebody who's also leading an organization, I think the mentorship values that you create within an organization are absolutely essential. I would like to say that I've been privileged to have many women leaders whom I worked with who also were good mentors. And mentorship means that you go with the belief that you may make a mistake, but it's not a train crash. And I think the space to be able to make mistakes, and if you are a leader, then that's where you are to mop it up if somebody is making a mistake. But if you're not going to give that space, then there is going to be no learning. So mentorship includes that. I think the fear most women need in many places, not just women, I think male leaders have is, well, if I give somebody the right to take decisions, and if that is wrong, then it will come on me. I think if you are a leader, then you need to be prepared that you are a leader because you should be in a position to be able to take care of mistakes that probably will get made. Just like you may have made mistake in your journey, and there were people who took care of it to make sure that you learned from those. And I think that kind of a thinking and mentorship and networking for women within sectors and in the development sector is absolutely essential. And it is not just within one institution, but it's also across institutions that I think we need to cultivate that much more. For our learnings, for where we are, for those who are in the second line leadership, to promote that. I also feel it's sometimes very important for an institution to look at how and who you are hiring into your organization. How consciously are you actually hiring to make sure that there is not just women, but women from with diversity in it, right? It's not a linear group. So in countries where you think there are men, why even in India, is it that we are taking a conscious decision to amplify positions? I think it's also important for us to then see that how are we advertising for positions, which communities are we making sure that it reaches to, where do we want to hire from, and that probably is your first step to say, therefore, you're willing to mentor. You are willing to take in people and build them up into leadership positions. It starts even before people are already in your organization. It starts from the point when you're trying to take people into your organization. So I think it's a much deeper and continuous process, and I think we all need to understand that and consciously address it, which we are trying to do in the foundation.
If I may chip in over here, I think it's one needs to be a little cautious also in the sense that as a support organization, when you're talking to a partner organization, it does not always go so well when you're talking about developing second line leadership, because the first line it's always a very difficult conversation. But I think despite that, it's very important to have these conversations and to say what is going to happen 5 years ahead. I mean, it's not that one is mandating them to make a change or asking them to make a change, but just to have that thought process that one needs to look ahead and equip other more younger leaders to come ahead and take up the responsibilities. But it has to be done with a lot of, one needs to do it very cautiously.
There's a question from, if I'll leave it to others to answer and then read the next.
I think this is from Christina. What are your broad hopes for how you would like to see the funding space evolve in India? What needs to change? Alifia, we would like to go.
Sure. I feel like recognition of the fact that what I tried to highlight in my earlier conversation as well, that these are all pieces of the larger goals that we have, and not looking at these as separate buckets. So looking at men and boys, engaging with men and boys as a separate bucket, adolescent girls as a separate bucket, economic empowerment as a separate bucket. I think my humble input to all institutional investments and donors would be to look at the fact that it is one big piece, and we are all looking at moving towards a just, equitable, gender equitable, just society. um, and we will have to address the complexities that come along the way. So get over the idea of mainstreaming to begin with, and then these separate buckets of, and looking at gender as a separate bucket is something that I just can't wrap my head around. But a lot of donors are looking at investing in gender, um, and I'm still to understand and decode and demystify what that means, because it is a cross-cutting theme across everything that you do. So how will you just look at gender is in isolation? I do recognize the need for intentionality, and do recognize the need for being focused on issues of building gender equity, but that will only happen if we just embed it into the DNA of an organization, irrespective of whether they are an NGO, a social enterprise, or a corporate for that matter. And I think we need to talk about these issues more and more, um, and address and create counter narratives, in it's using media as a tool to have more dialogues of intersectionality and cross-cutting themes.
I think if I may add, Damayanti, is that, when I was just starting off in my career many years back, one of the organizations I worked for, and the message that I got on my second day at work here is that we're not here to tell Indian institutions and organizations what we want to fund, but we would like to know from them what needs to be funded, which was a very pertinent message coming from a very large, at that time, very well known bilateral. And it's not something I see being played out that much, and this is also true for even bigger philanthropies, right? Every philanthropy has certain likes, or any foundations or philanthropies or bilaterals or multilaterals. You're driven by certain agenda items and ideas that you want to work on. And then, and I'm not saying that those are not always relevant. Probably most of them are. But what is critical is to unpack that to the context. Because if you are going to work on, say, issues of, say, equitable access to resources in India, how that program would look in India would be, say, educational resources would be very different from how that program would look in Cambodia, or how that program would look in Nepal. And so while equitable access to educational resources could be the agenda, the specificities of that has to be very, very contextualized. And that's where you need to hear, what do institutions working in this space want to work on, rather than coming and saying, here are my 3 things, and this is what we are going to fund, and this is what we're going to look at. And therefore, you are then straitjacketing people into saying, here it is. So I'd really like to have that openness, the iterativeness in the funding space, for everybody to say, yes, there are 5 pillars, yes, but within each pillar, there's a context. And in that context, there's a sub-reality that I need to look at and address that, if we do that, I think the work would be more real and meaningful. The results will be more sustainable. The reason most of the time a lot of us are left struggling to explain sustainability and prove it, it's because we are not really looking at providing resources where it's most needed in the most contextual and real manner. It becomes a challenge. And so it has to be across the board. And therefore, it's not just the leadership within the organizations we fund, but it's the leadership within organizations like ourselves and other bilaterals that also need to start thinking beyond your own perspectives with more openness, as Alifia was saying. Yeah.
Damayanti, can I come in? I just wanted to share some experience, more like a comment.
Yeah.
So
Please.
my name is Nirupama. I'm calling in from Chennai, also part of Prajna. And I really liked what Nandita mentioned about, donor learning from the ground. And I've worked both with a large donor organization as well as small grassroots recipient. And something that I've learned and something that I've realized is that we shouldn't miss, even as a small organization, we shouldn't miss an opportunity for donor education. And donors are actually ready to learn if only we are ready to push them to learn. And there have been times when we've also had to walk away from certain very kind of uh, something that would have come through, but we didn't want to compromise on it, or we couldn't make headway, and so we had to move out. One positive example that I'd like to share is when we at ActionAid, we actually successfully managed to negotiate with the donor. The results matrix was all done, and some of us, I had come into the organization much later, but there was already a results matrix that was set, and we were trying to work towards that. But towards the end, we actually managed to convince the donor for a feminist evaluation that put young women at the center. And though the parameters were already decided, what we managed to successfully negotiate was to get the young women decide the definitions of the parameters that were chosen. So if you had something like so many women would demonstrate leadership, how do you define that leadership? So is it only about women going on to different platforms or leading groups? Is that the only way we can define leadership? Or can we also look at it, the young women defined it as they were able to negotiate delaying the marriage, negotiate with their family for delaying the marriage, or getting the housework shared with the husband, or going and attending a meeting in another city. So we were able to negotiate with the donor and with our other partners as well, to look at the definition, relook at the definition of leadership while still retaining those parameters. And I think that was a very interesting and very engaging process, where we actually got everybody together and it was actually ground up. So the results matrix was probably decided at a larger level, but understanding what exactly each of those terms mean for the young women, we were able to put that at the center. So just want to say that there is always an opportunity for engaging with the donor, because I think that's not something that everybody explores. It's always you look at it as अच्छा ये बड़े लोग पैसे दे रहे हैं, so we won't be able to negotiate. But I've had several positive examples where we've been able to work with the donor, help them understand what's happening, and wherever if you're not able to completely change it, but at least tweak it to better represent what's happening on the ground. So just wanted to share that example. Thanks.
Thank you, Nirupama. Yeah, Swarna,
Damayanti?
yeah.
Yeah, I have been, I'm going to yield to the temptation after 3 weeks to ask, at the end of the Ramayana, who is Sita kind of question. I tell you, one of my ongoing discomforts with working with men and boys has been, it sounds, when I hear, oh, but you must talk to men and boys about it, we must have men in this conversation. When I hear it in a workshop or a seminar or a training context, it sounds to me very much like that old last patriarchal flag waving for the rights of men who are now under threat because of this feminist onslaught. And depending on my state of mind and my physical energy of the day, I respond to it in that frame. I understand the logic of working with men. I understand the politics of needing to take everybody along on the road to social change. But I also, given that so many of us work with so little, not just money sometimes is the least of the resources that we require, but few people, little time, etc., then I think, well, should I spend this time once more chasing after men who actually enjoy being chased and who get a kick out of not being responsive? I mean, I'm going to put this very crudely and provocatively at the end of 3 weeks, because I think that for a lot of us, sometimes this is the question, this is the problem that we have not resolved in our heads. Theoretically, this is wonderful. And I think, part of why I have wanted to work with ECF for a long time, is because I think this is admirable and important work. But then when someone asks me this question, this is my gut reaction. And, you know, how should I respond to this? What should I be thinking?
I'll take your bait, Swarna.
No bait, genuine question.
No, genuine. I get it. No, I'm just joking. No, honestly, I think that's not. It's not a question that we have not asked ourselves. To be very honest, it's also like, do I really need to move the little resources I have to working in schools and universities, talking to men and boys, asking them to be more responsive to the other half in their family and in the lives and in the society. Would I not be better off just focusing on that other half and empowering, giving my energy to that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a straight answer to that, but one of the things we have realized, Swarna, is that what is useful is when you're working with a set of women, and that's actually some of how our work in India, for example, with the Gender Lab guys started, was that they were working to empower girls, and they were at this Women Empowerment Avanti program, and we started working with them together on working that. And the same story happened in Nepal with another organization I was working with, Ujalo and Nirar. But what we also realized is that however much we invested in the girls, when they went back home, there was a cohort of men who made it difficult for them to exercise the empowerment that we were trying to get them to exercise. Now, without reaching out to that cohort, my story with her, or my journey with her, remained incomplete. Now, therefore, it became imperative that we also address that cohort who loves yielding this power. And honestly, question was, why would they want to give it up? Just because I am empowering this other set of people, why would they want to give up this power that they have over her and over others in their family at her asking or at my asking?
Mm-hmm.
And so that brought us to then saying, how do we work with men and boys? There's one thing to say, you need to speak up on behalf of women. Or my question would be, like, why? I'm very happy wielding power the way I am as a man, and why should I suddenly start saying that my sister should go to work or my mother should be allowed to wear a sari of her choice or whatever? I'm fine doing this. The question that then brought us, and which is where now I think for us, while that, and I'm not discounting that part of work, that discourse needs to continue. But it is still not going to be complete unless we really invest, and at least for our, from our institutional personal point of view, invest in understanding is what men describing as power or experiencing as power truly an empowering situation for them as people, as human beings. Is that wielding of power, of control, of taking away the identity or undermining the identity of somebody, really something that they truly, if you dig deeper and ask them, is that the construct of power within masculinity that you would be comfortable living with, and unpack it for them, because nobody has really, right? Nobody has sat with them. That's a much deeper and much more long-term conversation. And it needs to happen alongside with the other work. It cannot just be that. And we also ourselves, feminism and feminist reality is my lived reality, so I can express it better, I know it. Masculinity and masculine power and agency is not my lived reality. So I need to even understand it much more and invest in it, maybe with those who I can, and figure this out. And honestly, right now we are at that stage in the foundation of trying to understand what this is that I can tweak better to make this conversation more real and say, do we really need to redefine therefore what power really is? Hard question, not an easy answer to, but I just think that for us, it was also important to address that other cohort as an immediate space where at least some of my empowerment journey with the women got realized by her, even if it's not fully there. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I want to echo that. Actually, that's a great question, maybe to end. It leaves us a lot of food for thought. It is difficult. And it is not about moving resources to this or that, but also combining everything. So one of the, and again I'm going to quote Srinivas, because I was having this conversation with him, Srinivas from Azad Foundation, and he said that with all the skilling work and employability work that they are doing with women with wheels, will women be able to empower themselves and build in their agency and voice? The answer is yes, they will be. It may take longer than it would we would have liked it to take, but they will be. Will this process become easier if we also talk to people who are hindering and creating obstacles in her pathway? Probably yes. The process may be a bit easier if we just address the people who are creating barriers, not, and I use the word allow in brackets, not allow, commas, not allowing her to go out to work, not allowing her to have her mobility and ownership over herself. Um, and we also recognize, and I'm speaking individually based on dialogues that I've had with program partners, is that the burden of really creating change cannot be just on the shoulders of girls and women. They are not responsible for the problem, hence they should not be responsible for solving this problem either. Do they get affected? Yes, they are the ones who are the most affected, because under the garb of safety, protection, well-being, they are the ones who are restricted the most. Who restricts them? Studies and evidence shows that most of the time it is the people in decision-making power in the household who end up being, most of the times, being men and boys. Um, so roundabout answer to this is that while it is about it's a difficult conversation. It's about them having to give up their own power and privileges. But like Nandita was saying, maybe they are also a victim of this power and privilege. Because while we talk to men and boys, we need to recognize that men and boys also get physically and sexually harassed by other men and boys in power, or other people in power. And it's not just this single monolith versus the other monolith, right? There's so much complexity, even with respect to the current narratives that we are hearing. Some religions are dominant, some religions are not dominant. There are layers even within caste, etc., so on and so forth. So men and boys are also um, suffering, probably because of these brackets and buckets that we've created of masculinity, so on and so forth. Are they suffering as much as women and girls? No. So I'm also very clear of the fact that it's not ye bichare suffer kar rahe hain, let's go and try and solve their problem. That's not the issue. But the issue is that by being perpetrators of violence, or by uh, being abused themselves, they also have a problem. The problem is smaller. But what we need to create is a conducive environment, and that conducive environment, and like I was saying, if we want to keep our end goal as a just society, which is equitable to all, and especially the ones that are most marginalized because of layers and layers of class, caste, religion, ability, disability, so on and so forth, we will have to increase the consciousness of people, and that will only happen with engagements, dialogues, etc. And Damayanti, coming back to your point on dialogues with leadership, yes, completely agree, because it's also leadership, not only about the organization but also the donor, the grant maker, that leadership, and then leadership in around that we see in the country and states and news channels and so on and so forth. So I think we need to deconstruct this whole meaning of leadership, and what does that mean? Whose voices get heard the most? Um, yeah, but I think, Swarna, the hope that I go back every time I talk to program partners is that there is openness to learning amongst different groups, and sometimes they just don't know any better. They've watched Salman Khan movies all their lives, and they think that's masculinity and that's how men behave. And evidence from ECF, Christina has been saying that sometimes they come back saying that हमें किसी ने बताया ही नहीं था, हमने जो देखा हमने वो किया. So it's also those stories and anecdotes that kind of show evidence that it is worth the investment and effort. Sometimes more, sometimes less. And having said that, not by compromising the resources we put towards adolescent girls, young women, but combining those two pieces and creating a more conducive environment for all.
If I may just add to that, I think what Alefia said and also Nandita, absolutely true. We at FES are not even working with men and boys directly till now, though we are having these conversations. And I think it is with the partner organizations, one has to be at a certain stage. One keeps having these conversations, and when you get an absolute no, obviously you can't move on. But when it comes as a realization that yes, it is something which one needs to engage with, then I think it challenges us also to see how and what we can do in this regard. Because at some point, it does come through that either they have to be seen as allies or they have to be seen as withholders or whatever it is, but one needs to engage. And I think it's important that one starts that process of thinking and engaging on these lines. Um, Back to my other hat. There's there's one question. I mean, actually, there
No,
are
no,
two.
it's not a question, Damayanti. I just wanted to say, I turned off my video so I can speak better, and I'm hoping it works.
Yeah.
So just responding very quickly to the questions that have come. One is about leadership, and I'm presuming that it's not leadership just at the organization level, but the ecosystem leadership, right? That is people in the governance level, people at the judiciary level, the police, all of these in totality reinforce patriarchal norms, and it gets very difficult for organizations working in the field and for women to get anywhere with it. So one thing that I think some of our partners are doing constructively is getting more women into governance. And I think that's very important for us to continue to do that, especially getting women to be a part, be sarpanchas or be a part of the panchayat elections, right? And these are women basically have strong feminist views, who are sometimes single women who have struggled through the entire cultural norms that the community expects them to other, and are now getting leadership training to be the next line of grassroots leaders that we've tried and created. And this is actually a part of our constitutional values and fellowship programs that we run within the philanthropy. The second part about organizational leadership per se, I'd say that even at organization level, and I'm not speaking about organizations working in gender-based violence, but organizations working across the board, you won't find a single woman leader in for example, a small and marginal farmer organization. Right? Though 50% of the women are farmers, 50% of the women are lesser paid and not equitably paid as men are. 50% of them do drudgery work, which takes long hours. So it's important for us. It's important to not reinforce leadership as masculine leadership. Right? It is about changing what leadership should look like and should evolve to, which is not norms of being hard, harsh, taskmaster, etc. And we are working with organizations to change a perspective about leadership. And perhaps doing that, we can get somewhere with not only women second line leaders, but men who are sensitive leaders in per se, right? And not just focusing on that. Thirdly, Swarna's question about whether we should continue. There is very little funds anyways in the gender-based violence and the women's space, and should those little funds be focusing on men issues? I'd say that I am very uncomfortable with the fact that when we work with men and boys, we keep telling them that you have the power to make decisions for women, right? You have the power to ensure that women can go to school, women can get livelihood, women can move around. I think that we would want those programs to continue because that's a different genre of programs. And if we continue to focus it, we'll end up having a battery of different organizations, programs that are not conducive at all. So we are very, very careful about the type of or the models and the values of programs that we support. We are very clear that at some level we want communities to basically look at violence against women as an abhorrence, to look at it as something that is diseased and unacceptable on the long run, and to to have everybody work towards it. So those are generally the principles that we are trying to work. Of course, people evolve as we grow. We will learn from our partners. Things might change, but a sense of what we want to do and how the change is and how careful we are with respect to supporting certain programs, understanding organization vision and objectives with these programs, stay with us.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm sorry I was able to follow about just 60% of what you said. I don't know about the others, but I think I got what you were trying to say. And yes, absolutely, it's important to have the values of the different programs and looking at it as a whole in a very holistic way. I think we are way past the time when we are supposed to end. So, Swarna, there are a couple of questions. Do you want me to
Go
take
ahead.
it? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So there's
The
one.
panelists can say.
If the panelists are okay with it, Alefia
Sure,
and
sure, sure.
okay. So there's one question on how do you see the impact bonds, impact investing, social stock exchange, etc., that have a bias or prefer cookie cutter programs affecting the funding to gender transformative work that are complex, require long-term engagement, and outcomes are difficult to quantify.
Nandita, Sonia.
Actually, it's very, I mean, I'm sorry, I tend to butt in, but I'm just going to take the privilege of being the facilitator and do that. Yes, surely it is like, it can be like that. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not very familiar with impact investing and all, but I tried to inform myself and had some discussions around it. And the kind of people who are engaged in trying to get impact investing were the people who were actually aware of these nuances. And I was pretty surprised that I had a lot to learn from them. That's all I had to say. Yeah, Nandita or Alefia or Sonia, if you would like to add.
I don't think any of us would have a simple answer because this is a real concern. But I guess we'll all have to be smart about how I think as an organization, if um, we agree that gender is important, and gender equity is our one of our main goals. I'm tempted to say the main goal, but I'll leave that to the respective organization. I think then it becomes easier to tweak it into the larger scheme of whatever the funder is asking. So, for example, what I'm trying to say is that let's say even if the ask of the funders or whatever these stock exchange, I'm not very aware of the most recent development, but let's say even if the ask is to focus on health or economic empowerment or so on and so forth, but if as an organization, as an implementer, you're very clear on the fact that it's not just about numbers, equal number of men and women, boys and girls, and completely recognizing that gender is a spectrum, but it's about how do you meet the reporting requirement, whatever that is. But as an implementing organization, if you're conscious of the fact that transformative programming happens in a certain way and there are certain modules that you need to embed, I don't think anyone can stop you from doing it. I don't think as an implementation organization any funder could have the control over कि ये मत करो, इतना ही करो और ये मत करो. I think if the organization is convinced about why they're doing what they're doing, I still feel optimistic about tweaking it into the larger scheme of things. And like someone was saying, I think Nirupama was saying, there's always scope to negotiate with the funder and really again educate in quoted commas, saying that educate them if they don't know any better. I think we all will have to take that agency and onus and power to really make that difference, is what I want to say, because it is complex. Yes, it is difficult, but we can all do whatever we can do if we are convinced.
Yeah, perhaps coming here, and if I'm getting the question right, it basically is saying that, in the sector of domestic violence or women, programs kind of look identical to each other, right? And I'm thinking that that's where it's coming from. And to answer that, I mean, this is also a view that we had internally when we were looking at programs, and we were looking at children programs and women programs, at adolescent girls programs. All community-based interventions seem to look like cookie cutters of each other. And it seemed that, we were supporting the same type of programs in the same way. That's when, as an organization, we decided to deep dive into the actual programs and realize, in a sense, they were very different. For example, a program in Northeast would cover anti-trafficking along with other community-based interventions. A program in Sundarbans working with women would also cover impact of women and disaster, right? The next disaster and women. So these programs, if we go deep into it, are very different, giving the cultural, geographic significance and a sense of the organization and where they're working in. And I think we need to, at least we need to make an effort to understand these programs threadbare, and then perhaps decide whether it's actually just a community-based program. Has the organization got the strength and the capacity to run a community-based program? Yeah, I'm done.
Sonia, we have lost you again.
I'm done.
Okay. Okay. Nandita, would you like to also respond, or should I just take the last question?
I think we can take the last question, Damayanti. I think that's fine.
Okay. I think it's not a question, it's more of a comment. The trickle-down effect of the toxic leadership is going to make it tougher, and I've lost it. I'm sorry, if someone else can read it out.
I think it's saying it's going to make it tougher to achieve gender equity. Yeah, it's not a question, it's more a comment, and I guess there's not much disagreement on the comment.
Okay.
There is a question that got overlooked. It's by Harita. How can we involve adolescent boys in activities to end violence against women? To some extent, this was covered in the last panel. And but if anyone would like to briefly.
I just think that you'll have to look for openings, and I think both Alifia, ECF, Swarna, your organization, Asia Foundation, we are all looking at working with adults and boys through different openings. Sometimes it's in the community, sometimes it's through the structured academic institutional entry point, sometimes it's through youth clubs, semi-formal institutional partnerships, and sometimes it's just left more open-ended in working with programmatic groups that we work with. So yes, I think while working with adults and boys in activities is important, it cannot, this is my personal view and institutional from TAF, is it cannot be something that you just do as a standalone for them to say, this is what you're going to do with you. It has to be a part of a more integrated programming that they may be engaged in, whatever that is, whatever the institutions and community groups are working in. So yeah, I agree that it's important, but it's just that you need to find the opening which is going to make what you are going to, or will help you achieve what you want to, in a less conflicting, or let's say in a more cohesive manner. I think Alifia, you were going to add something. So yeah,
something very similar, I think. And Christina, I'm going to quote you here because one of the things that we are also learning is it's a very good starting point. One is start where you are. So whatever you do, whether health, education, etc., how difficult is it to have a 2-hour or 3-hour dialogue on human rights, and just recognizing, talk about equality and gender equity and what that means, and decode that for teenagers and what it means for them. So I'm no expert, I'm just going to quote Christina, and she said that sometimes adolescents just keep getting messages, very different messages from different forms of consumption, especially digital consumption, and it just helps to build perspectives in a very non-threatening way. So it's the first dialogue is obviously about giving up their not about giving up their privileges. That's not the starting point that could probably work, but it's about a very non-threatening dialogue on what does it mean, what does having equal human rights for everyone, which our constitution promises us, mean. And I would say that every school needs to make this dialogue compulsory. That's and echo everything that you said, Nandita. Look for openings wherever they are, whether community programs, schools, institutions, whatever it is. But I feel like it's our own individual responsibility to at least adhere to the constitution that has been promised to us, which is quite under threat, I want to say.
I think I totally agree, and it's very important that where you enter and how you enter. Quite often, when you're working with adolescent girls, the openings come, or at other times on when one is engaging with the youth in colleges or schools. So I think also that the last panel, there were specific examples on this, so I'm not going to go on this.
The video is up on YouTube.
Okay. The previous panel, right?
Yes.
I think I will close the discussion here. And before ending, I would just like to say, Prajna and ECF, a huge thanks for involving me in this discussion. It's been really, really a really learning experience for me. And I enjoyed the initial discussions which we had over email with the panelists. And I don't think we could have had a better panel, Nandita, Sonia, and Alifia. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think these kind of discussions are extremely important. This last 1 year, what's been happening around the world, we've seen that it's just not enough that we are having these discussions within us or with like-minded people. We need to engage outside our comfort zones, be it liberals, conservatives, right, left, across the board. If we don't have these discussions, I don't think we will make much progress. And it's very, very important that we don't get polarized in our own way of thinking. And I think one thing this whole pandemic and staying at home and being more in touch digitally has shown me is that even within our own families, within our own friends, how important it is to have these discussions. And we just don't know the various outlooks and points of views. And one can't just say that, oh, this is it, and not engage. It is very, very important to engage. With these few words, I hand over to Swarna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Can I just say a last point? I promise is I completely agree that it is important. I feel like one last pitch that I'm going to make is for building bridges, where we are saying collate, don't reinvent the wheel. There's already a lot that exists, a lot of experiences that are out there that we can build upon. My if nothing at all, if the entire conversation was not valuable, even then my last point would be that let's build up on what we have. There is evidence to show that there are various creative ways of engagements. Let's use and share resources and really take it from there, rather than trying to do our own thing and reinvent the whole process.
And that's a lovely note to finish on, because for us at Prajna, actually one of our 3 mandates is to connect with people. We're explicitly asked by our founding deed to connect with people and to connect people. And so we'd be very happy to be part of any such process or initiative that any of you start, or to start one with you. Thank you very much to each and every one of you. Damayanti, for doing this wonderful facilitation. Alifia, Sonia, Nandita, we hope to be in touch with you. Now you're part of our community as well. And Christina, ECF, Project Raise, Antika, Swasini, Yogesh, all of you for including us in this idea that you had, and reaching out to us to ask us to work with you on putting these together on a topic we know nothing about, mostly with people we're meeting for the first time. But we have learned so much. You have enriched our community, our knowledge by inviting us. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to everybody who has attended. Several people have attended all 3 sessions, and that's really great. I hope this means that we're really, I think for Christina, one of her objectives was that these 3 webinar sessions should start a larger community, a larger conversation. And I think the fact that people have come back for 3 to your wish, Christina. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Sharad, for hosting for 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank
Shall we
you.
take, shall we take a picture,
Yes,
Christina?
yes,
Swarna?
please. Yes, yes.